I'm Bill Lepp. Welcome back to my office for another edition of Quarantine Entertainment. Here is another story that I don't think I've ever told from stage. This is called The Compendium of Lesser Known Tooth Fairies. Grandpa, asked Flo Ride, what are you doing? Grandpa threw the pillows from his bed. I'm looking for the false tooth fairy. The tooth fairy doesn't leave teeth under your pillow, said Flo. She knew a lot about the tooth fairy. She'd lost a lot of teeth recently. Grandpa scurried into the living room. I'm not looking for the tooth fairy. I'm looking for the false tooth fairy. She steals my dentures. Is there more than one tooth fairy? Asked Flo Ride. Why, sure there are, said Grandpa. When I was younger, there was the saber tooth fairy. He's extinct now. I suppose my generation has the Bluetooth fairy, said Flo. Indeed, said Grandpa. He collects broken communication devices. Why, there's bushels of tooth fairies, said Grandpa. Some are good, some are up to no good. For example, there's the toothpaste fairy. She steals the lid off the toothpaste and hides it. She squeezes the tube from the top. She leaves toothpaste in the sink. I knew it, spat Flo. And then there's the toothpick fairy, said Grandpa. You can figure out what he has to do. Gross, Flo grimaced. Grandpa marched into the mudroom. And don't forget the loose tooth fairy. How do you think your teeth get loose in the first place? Flo imagined a tooth fairy with a tiny hammer coming and knocking her teeth loose. That notion touched a nerve. Grandpa kicked into the kitchen. Don't believe me? If you ever get a chance, why, you can ask the Long in the Tooth Fairy. He's the oldest of all the tooth fairies. Or the Wisdom Tooth Fairy. She's the wisest of all the tooth fairies. Flo helped Grandpa pick through the pots and pans. He said, then there are the plural tooth fairies. There's the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy visits people who lose their two front teeth at once. And the Tooth Fairy. That's T-W-O-O-T-H. The Tooth Fairy visits people who lose two teeth at the same time. Often, the Tooth Fairy and the Tooth Fairy work in conjunction, especially for hockey players. Flo giggled and guided Grandpa to the basement. We should check here, she said. Grandpa rooted through the laundry for his false teeth. Flo continued her oral examination. Are there other tooth fairies? She asked. Well, there's the lying through your teeth fairy. She spreads dental-related untruths that lead to moral, tooth decay, and gum disease. And there's the gnashing of teeth fairy. He's the angriest of all the tooth fairies, but he's serving a long sentence in the Lockjaw Penitentiary. Flo searched the cavities in the rock wall while Grandpa fumbled through the freezer and around the furnace. Where has that false tooth fairy hidden my teeth? Oh, and don't forget the truth fairy. Technically, the truth fairy is not a tooth fairy, but the truth fairy and the lying through your teeth fairy are engaged in eternal combat. I wonder, said Flo, where the truth fairy is right now. Still don't believe me? Asked Grandpa. He opened a dusty trunk full of photo albums and field guides. He extracted an old leather-bound edition. It's time you take a gander at this, said Grandpa. This is the Compendium of Lesser-Known Tooth Fairies. Oh, here's the Gold Tooth Fairy, Grandpa said. You'd think the Gold Tooth Fairy would be living on Easy Street, but gold is heavy, and the Gold Tooth Fairy is burdened by carrying around two bags, one full of gold coins and the other full of gold teeth. Flo paused at a plate called Rare Tooth Fairies. These are the most beautiful and endangered fairies, explained the book. Scarce as hen's teeth fairy is the rarest of all the tooth fairies, and the sweet tooth fairy has to stay in hiding because she's so delicious she might be gobbled up by hungry birds and toads. Here's the tough cookie, said Grandpa, the shark's tooth fairy. Sharks never sleep, so it's very difficult to locate a shark's pillow. I suppose the shark tooth fairy, said Flo, collects all the shark teeth and strings them on dental floss to give to beach bums and surfers. Exactly, said Grandpa. And what happens to all the teeth that the fairies collect? Said Flo. Oh, said Grandpa, they all go to the dead tooth fairy. He ushers dearly departed teeth into tooth heaven through the pearly white gates. Grandpa bristled at the next entry. Ooh, The fine-tooth comb fairy. He looked around his messy basement. She's a stickler. She is detail-oriented. She knows if you've been brushing. She knows if you've not. So brush well, for goodness sake. If I could sing, I'd do that to the Santa Claus song. I never did get along with the fine-tooth comb fairy, said Grandpa. You knew her? Asked Flo. I knew them all, said Grandpa. Grandpa, are you a tooth fairy? Asked Flo. Nope, I'm a dentist, said Grandpa. And then, quick as water from a pick, Grandpa leapt from the couch and snatched something out of the air. When he opened his hands, Flo gasped. In one hand was Grandpa's dentures. In the other hand was a shimmering, shining, smirking, false tooth fairy. This has been the Compendium of Lesser Known Tooth Fairies by Bill Lepp. Thank you for listening.